Hello, my name's Eleanor Levy. I've experienced multiple disadvantages, which I don't need to describe right now. I've also had professional careers in industry and public services, working in prison, probation, homelessness, community mental health and social care. More recently, I've been a volunteer engaged in mental health services after a mental health breakdown, eventually treated. So I've been asked to produce a response based on my lived experience regarding some topics about co-production, which we hope will stimulate thought and discussion. So the first question. In the MEAM approach network learning hubs, we're talking about co-production, how this work often gets stuck. Would you say this has been your experience? Yes, that has been my experience. It often gets stuck, and I think it happens particularly when people responsible for their part in the co-production effort regard it as an event that becomes completed, rather than a process that continues to improve in response to feedback and outcomes or as part of the quality improvement cycle. It may also get stuck or evaporate when there are staff changes. Other areas of stuckness include lack of shared goals in setting up, limiting the participants to the usual suspects, resistance to the whole idea, and work products that don't really help in practice or fail to capture the essence of what we're saying. I started my public service career as a counsellor working in prison within a system-defined framework. I set up some group work outside the frame. I was willing for the group to define the content. They said, we're fed up talking about drugs, we want to talk about something else. So I said, okay, let's choose what you want to talk about. What kind of things you want to discuss? Topic group, want it to be philosophical, practical. So we developed a range of topics in two broad streams reflecting preferences. These ran in the evenings, which was significant. It's in their association time, which they were giving up social and recreational activities to discuss something important to them. That impressed me, and I committed myself to facilitate that. Over time, I organised topics into themes that were somewhat repeatable for new people joining the groups. In general, they prepared and led the topic, and it was very successful if measured by attendance and engagement in other rehabilitative work and fit in their feedback. We also produced more structured group program useful as evidence of rehabilitative work for parole. It was structured and supported by staff and clients in development and co-delivering. So at the end, they would often say, oh, I wish I could do this again. And I would say, well, you can come with me to the next one and help me. So I'd give them a little bit of training for them to prepare. We also delivered a program for children excluded from school, where prisoners provided their experience, feedback, and they indicate the value of this, the participants. So shortly before I left that work, the director came to see what was going on. He asked me to stop the group work. We can't replicate that work. It's become psychotherapy. So there's an area of stuckness too, isn't it? Resources and repeatability. When I moved to work in probation, we quickly developed group work in response to presenting needs and commissioning requirements. There were two broad requirements, social skills and motivational work. And I used the structure for the motivational work we developed in prison, and my colleagues and clients provided up-to-date details for the different modules. It was developed and delivered along with the social skills, and it satisfied the needs of probation orders. So to a certain degree, it became frozen. But a spin-off from that training was for magistrates and judges about what the probation orders actually required, how the clients experience and try to fulfill the requirements, what it meant to engage and complete the order, and help the magistrates and judges be aware of the requirements when they were making the order, so they didn't set conditions that couldn't be fulfilled. In that case, there were overriding system requirements, which meant the content of the groups once agreed on, subject to quality control, became set, except for occasional manual updates if we found better materials. Well, I rose in my career to become a senior manager, and it won't surprise you to learn that I brought that programme to my work, including training staff to develop and deliver group work as part of a wellbeing strategy within homeless services. I piloted the programme with staff and volunteers and clients at a hostel specifically for people with mental health support needs. Very quickly, they revealed that they hated it, how the programme was, and so we were able to explore what it was they were disliked. And I realised I had brought it from a coercive culture into an empowering culture. And that brought the programme an enormous step forwards because there were no system requirements initially. We were mainly pursuing what would support wellbeing outcomes. That was the prime objective. So we changed it from a rigid structure that imposed an initial and final assessment by the practitioner to a more flexible approach where the clients were provided with the tools that we developed together. And these were picture cards that illustrated various characteristics, and it literally put in their hands the assessment of what they needed, what resources that they could bring, their strengths and capabilities. And that tool has remained useful. Very recently, I demonstrated it to a team leader in a local charity, and we're going to use it for training her team. And we can redevelop it with pictures that are relevant to them. It can be deployed in a community mental health service setting. The next question is, what do you feel are the biggest barriers to co-production? Well, I think we need to accept that it's difficult work. It requires consistency and skills, aptitudes and aspirations, and a lack of any of those would be a major obstacle. It's imperfect too, because those we most want to hear from might be unable to give voice to what they need. And I hear people saying that we should want equal power, but I think that's unworkable because as engagers, we're not really in a position to shoulder responsibility for the performance of the work, delivering services. Our support for practitioners and managers must remain tangential to their performance of the work, unless we become peer workers subject to system requirements. Systems in general are not yet geared towards the development of data that makes the case for change and drives and focuses co-production effort. Evidence required is not just to make the case for change, but to guide improvement and how to convert co-production effort into value. That's where we can be powerful. So the system may need some definition for a work product and timescale for its development, including resource allocation. And then that's going to be completed. And that becomes synonymous with ending of the project. But if staff involvement ceases, there's usually no focus or locus for the work to continue. And engagers who've contributed their lived experience often say we're not involved in the follow-up or analysis. We don't know what happened in the end. So we complain of not receiving feedback on the outcomes or impact. And some of us see the same requirements emerge subsequently after months or even years, and then we go through the same cycle again. To be self-sustaining, some dynamic growth must be built in, and that in turn becomes a rolling program where new engagers join an existing group, learn the ropes, engage in training, go on to become leaders of the next generation of development. If that is self-sustaining among engagers, then staff can pose new questions or development needs to the group. And that's what MEAM itself has actually created. It requires some staff and facility resources. The engagers are willing to continue to meet and share experience and respond to practice or strategic issues as these arise, or propose new ideas ourselves. We need a balance between enough structure for continuity and enough flexibility for creativity and growth. Of course, these factors also apply to practice or strategic issues. Which invokes the need for facilitated reflective practice that's empowered to inform and develop systems. So you can get the interaction between strategy, practice, and lived experience, and each of those can have its own reflective practice. But I'm suggesting that we go further and have pivotal settings for combined practice too. Reflective practice helps me to overcome my faults and bring my best to work with others. So the next question, where do you feel co-production gets stuck in a local area? Well, usually local areas are responding to their local factors that influence their service environment, and they bring their own strengths and weaknesses in responding to opportunities and threats, the SWOT thing. Whole systems at national, regional, and local level may reinforce that dynamic. An example is where the funding cycle itself stifles creativity, either through a recommissioning cycle that's non-adaptive, or because unspent funds in a system are drawn back instead of being used for development. With ever-increasing caseloads because of population increase and demographic change, improved outcomes or efficiency can get stifled. Intelligent commissioning can nurture creativity and allow co-production to grow if the system is adaptable towards localities. If it's safe to do it, try it. If it's effective, do it more. I was invited years ago to support a development where clients could engage in commercial activities to support their social re-engagement. It was successful, but it couldn't grow because any funds that they generated was drawn back into the system. I can do what they needed because my system was the same. Locally, the nature of care provision means that local authorities have different priorities. Where I live, there's a legacy of older people with learning difficulties because of institutional history, and a higher than average proportion of care homes because of the amenities, the lovely environment. So that directs attention to some needs and away from others, especially within integrated care systems. I think there's a tendency to view health and well-being needs and outcome in terms of the whole of the local authority or trust, as compared to the all England average. Indicators at average level command little attention compared to condition red, where performance or outcomes are significantly below average. But for some indicators that I look at, especially related to mental health, frequently there are large gaps between the average and the best. And usually you can't explain that only through resource difference, though in areas of deprivation, cuts in public services have had a disproportionately adverse effect. Some affluent areas have performance gaps well below the best in England, and some deprived areas are leaders, at least according to the measures for a particular issue. So I think part of relieving stuck progress is just generating the aspiration to be good rather than average. One of the biggest problems is to distinguish the measures that can be used to drive improvement. Some measures just indicate the amount of work performed without correlating its effects. Some point to a particular problem in a locality. Some indicate desired outcomes. Locally, joint strategic needs analysis is developed to focus on priorities, but does it have enough influence to change systems? It usually reflects very old data. We have huge amounts of data. It's difficult to tease out the factors that actually result in improved outcomes. Research is directed nationally and through regional structures. Effort is being made to engage communities more widely, but historically, educational clinical institutions have the capacity, and their cultures are most influential in developing evidence in health and social care. Local charities say, we would love to be involved in research, but we cannot afford the resources for bids to fund it. However, I hope it will not be too long before community organisations in the charitable and voluntary sector become more embedded in research culture. Nationally and regionally, these aspirations are built into their structure. They're actively seeking to nurture this engagement. They know the dominant cultures are still academic and clinical, but social values are becoming more valued and inclusion is starting. Their requirements include the attention must be given to public engagement, which is a good basis for moving towards system improvement. Now, MEAM areas tend to have an eye for inequalities and a desire to address them. And all public services, in theory, must fulfil their public duty regarding equalities. But my experience, and that of countless others, is that many public institutions fail significantly in some areas to perform this duty and adjust reasonably towards us. The financial ombudsman recently adjudicated for me against a commercial provider, and I've just received their check today, compensating me for their failure to adjust to my needs. Another example is in progress now with an energy provider. They failed to respond to my complaints and repeated the same failed actions. I'm reluctant to invoke that approach for any public institution, but we've got to see greater resolve, I feel, from all our services to address inequalities, and we should be able to ask them to provide evidence. There's enough public health data to identify health gaps, so systems need to be able to track inequality and make progress. For mental health services, I suspect the demographic data are less complete than in other disciplines, and that doesn't help services to focus on target groups who generally experience health inequalities. That's got to change out of principle as well as for practical and economic reasons. We simply cannot afford poorer health outcomes for segments of the population and the health and social costs these entail, especially when there are opportunities for redressing the balance. So, how do I feel when co-production project I'm involved with gets stuck? I've had the privilege of working with several Darcy fellows supporting their projects, and one involved developing resources to support health checks for people with serious mental illness. The objective was to tackle health inequalities for these people whose morbidity and mortality is much higher on average than the national average, and identify issues and address them, such as diagnostic overshadowing, system access, and so on, and produce some suggestions to avoid pitfalls that make health checks a meaningful and effective means for identifying and addressing needs. We then developed a question and answer training session, which was co-produced and delivered to a training cadre involved mainly nurses responsible for delivering the health checks. And we developed leaflets and information about the scheme. Then the Darcy fellow completed the project, returned to a substantive role in NHS. The feedback from the nurses said it was the best session they'd attended that week. The commissioner noticed this sometime after and wanted us to adapt it for a session for a regional primary care conference. Then the session got hacked about a bit. The commissioner had his own agenda to fulfill. Another participant within the time wanted to talk more about primary care networks and how they were developing. Then there was another attempt to revive it and another commissioner took interest, but that didn't take place because they moved on. So that was all well and good, but I've no idea whether morbidity and mortality among the target group has increased, stayed the same, or reduced. What I know is, for me, it was a worthwhile use of my time and energy, helped me develop my co-production skills and cope at a bad time in my life. At that time, I also spent a long time making a video to support strength-based training and things like that, and I've no idea whether that's had any outcome or impact. Without feedback and good data that measures impact and outcomes, I don't think we can know the effects of our engagement. Usually I feel excitement when asked to engage and provide my experience, satisfaction with progress and action towards a work product. If there's subsequent lack of further news or feedback, I may feel disquiet or disappointment. I may feel suspicion regarding hidden agenda. But mainly I do it because I believe in it and I hope that it will help to build something that lasts beyond my efforts. Finally, I've been asked to provide advice to someone feeling frustrated by barriers to their co-production work. I've worked with some great and inspiring practitioners and leaders in health and social care and campaigners in human rights. Nearly all of them have experienced a certain weariness, having to repeatedly challenge systematic failure to uphold equality or challenge poor practice or instances of individual thoughtlessness or prejudice. And I've shared that weariness and flinched on low days from challenging some aspect of ignorance or behaviours that exclude or belittle me or someone else or fall below public standards. These are the standards which we've been trained or which experience tells us we should observe because they're right and fair. When my back's been to the wall, I've recalled past experiences and training which have led me to establish firmness in my beliefs, my principles, my ethos. These experiences only have meaning if I uphold them. They brought me through so far, through lots of difficulties and lots of experiences. They've inspired high levels of performance and achievement, despite my weaknesses, my imposter syndrome in various roles. Am I really good enough for this? So I return to what gives me my life purpose and meaning, and that's to use the value of my experiences to reduce suffering and promote the well-being of others. And that may sound a little bit trite, but I'm in recovery because of the example set by others. They set aside their time and their priorities to help me. If you know a path that requires less effort, that will deliver a higher reward, do let me know. But I doubt I'll abandon my principles. For the time being, that they're the values that make my life worth living. I wake up every morning thinking, oh no, this again. But then I think, well, I've got something to do today. There's something in the calendar, some training or learning or participation. So these principles direct my effort. That's why I've recorded this for you and spent a huge amount of time matching the soundtrack to the subtitles. I hope to stimulate conversation. We might need to make the case for co-production over and over and over again, but I hope we can move on. Co-design and co-production are worth doing out of principle. In NHS, this is mandated by policy and should inform any trained strategies. If any more evidence is needed, then it should be resourced. But what we need more than evidence to make the case is the development of research and data sets and designs for what works that will track co-production effort through the years into outcomes and impact. The MEAM areas say, and they're obliged to say, that we have the coordination and the data capability to support the MEAM approach. So perhaps we need to take that to the next level. Maybe areas will co-commit to a data design that includes some indicators for co-produced work. And it needs to be just good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to address every issue. It must help at a practice level, strategically at area and regional level, to support strategy and engage lived experience and be amenable to national analysis and data visualization. These are only my views and not necessarily applicable to all people everywhere, like everything else I've said. So have a productive day, thinking of a better way, and enjoy it. Thank you for listening.